monarchy will be shifting in a slightly different direction.
I think it's safe to say that change is...
It was not a request for a crown, a title, or a place beside the throne. It was something quieter, and perhaps far more dangerous. Inside a sealed royal collection room, Queen Camilla asked for permission to personally handle the late Queen's coronation gown. Prince William's answer came without hesitation. No. One word transformed a private discussion into a confrontation over memory, authority, and who now had the right to stand closest to Elizabeth II's legacy. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla entered with purpose. She wanted to study the embroidery before an exhibition showing continuity between one reign and the next. The royal collection, the protected body of art, clothing, and objects held for the monarchy, had placed this gown under exceptional preservation rules. It was not ordinary ceremonial dress. It carried the late monarch's touch, history, and memory. William knew why that mattered. The coronation gown, the embroidered dress worn when a sovereign is formally crowned, had become personal to him. He did not see silver thread or historic fabric. He saw his grandmother, the woman whose steady presence had survived scandal, grief, and family fracture. Protecting the garment felt like protecting a final promise left in his hands. Camilla raised one gloved hand toward the conservation case, the sealed enclosure designed to prevent light, air, and contact from damaging fragile material. William stepped forward before her fingers reached the glass. He did not shout or accuse her. He simply placed himself between the queen consort and the gown. "No one will handle it," he said. The refusal landed harder than anger. Camilla froze, then lowered her hand. Her expression tightened because the decision did not feel technical. It felt like a warning that becoming queen had not opened every door guarded by Elizabeth II. She expected a discussion. Instead, she found a boundary waiting for her. A senior conservator broke the silence through a documented access memorandum prepared weeks earlier. The record showed that the prince had amended the gown's handling instructions, limiting approval to himself, Catherine, and a narrow group of preservation officials. Camilla read the page twice. William had anticipated her request. He had not reacted in the moment. He had prepared for it. Camilla removed her gloves with deliberate calm and looked directly at him. "Did your father approve this?" William gave no answer. That silence changed everything. What began beside a glass case would soon force every person involved to reveal what the gown represented to them, and which loyalties they were prepared to sacrifice in order to possess its meaning. To Camilla, the gown represented recognition she had spent decades waiting to receive. To William, it carried the presence of the woman who had held the monarchy together while his own family fractured around her. Neither entered the dispute as a neutral guardian. Both carried old wounds into that room. And as the silence hardened between them, the garment became more than fabric. It became the final boundary between inherited authority and earned belonging. William stepped into the corridor alone and opened his hand, then closed it again. The movement was small, but it betrayed everything he had hidden inside the collection room. To him, Elizabeth II's personal objects were not prizes passed automatically to whoever stood nearest the throne. They were extensions of private trust, pieces of a relationship that had survived years of scandal, loss, and uncertainty. The prince feared something deeper than damage to old fabric. He feared the gown would be folded into a new royal story, polished and arranged until the late queen's memory served a purpose she had never chosen. The collection committee, the small group responsible for decisions about protected royal objects, gave him influence over access. Yet influence was not the same as certainty, and he knew his decision could still be challenged. Catherine had understood that fear before anyone else. During a private conversation days earlier, William had shown her the revised access restriction and asked whether he was going too far. She had read every line, then told him the gown should remain untouched unless there was a clear historical need. Her support steadied him, even though she had not stood beside him when Camilla raised her hand toward the case. Camilla returned to her private sitting room and dismissed her aide before the door had fully closed. She sat without removing her coat. Anger came first. Humiliation followed. William had not merely refused her request. He had done it in front of palace staff, making the queen consort feel like a visitor asking permission inside a world that still did not fully accept her. She had spent years enduring whispers that she would never belong at the emotional center of the monarchy. Now, even as queen, she felt that suspicion tightening around her again. The title had brought rank, ceremony, and public duty. It had not brought unquestioned access to Elizabeth II's private legacy. Then the truth became sharper. Charles had never seen the revised access order. William had acted through the committee without first asking the king to approve it. Camilla understood the danger immediately. This was no longer only about grief or preservation. It was about whether the monarch's wife or his heir held greater power over the past. Camilla rose at last and reached for the telephone. She would not argue through courtiers. She would speak directly to Charles and force him to choose. But the rejection had not emerged from a single request, because weeks earlier, during another private ceremony, one gesture from Camilla had convinced William that the gown was already in danger. The true beginning of the conflict came 3 weeks before the gown room confrontation. During a private planning session at Windsor, Camilla made a suggestion that appeared harmless to everyone except William. She wanted the late Queen's coronation gown placed beside her own ceremonial robe in an exhibition titled, "Two Queens, One Crown." The room remained polite. William did not object. Yet from that moment onward, he began preparing to ensure the comparison could never happen. Camilla believed the project could show continuity between one reign and the next. The proposed exhibition would bring together robes, photographs, handwritten notes, and ceremonial objects to tell the story of the monarchy's passage from Elizabeth II to Charles. A ceremonial robe is a formal garment worn during major royal occasions. And to her, placing the two garments together would present strength, stability, and an unbroken institution. William saw something far darker. He believed his grandmother's private belongings were being turned into symbols designed to strengthen another person's place. To him, the gown was not a prop. It carried the memory of a woman who had held the family together while others fought around her, and he would not allow that memory to be arranged into a message she had never approved. Camilla placed 2 exhibition cards side by side on the table. One carried the late Queen's name. The other described her own robe. William watched in silence, then reached across, separated the cards, and turned his grandmother's card face down. The gesture cut through the politeness. Camilla looked directly at him and asked whether he considered her unworthy of appearing beside the former monarch. William held her gaze and answered that worthiness was not something an exhibition could manufacture. The words were calm, but the wound they created was immediate. Charles shifted at the head of the table. The king picked up his fountain pen, seemed ready to defend his wife, then placed it down again. His silence protected no one. Camilla felt abandoned, while William understood that his father would avoid choosing for as long as possible. William acted the moment the meeting ended. He privately contacted the royal textile conservator, the specialist responsible for protecting historic clothing, and asked who could authorize direct access to the gown. The answer came through a recorded telephone conversation. The existing instructions were unclear. Unless rewritten, the reigning queen could request supervised handling. That possibility hardened his resolve. William returned home and drafted new restrictions with Catherine beside him. She read each line and urged him to remove every personal accusation. The order had to be about preservation, she warned, not punishment. By morning, the prince had signed it, yet he already knew the paper would not end the battle. Once Camilla discovered what he had done, she would turn to Charles. The hidden order had prevented Camilla from touching the gown, but now, in the king's private library, William would be forced to defend the decision face to face. Charles summoned William before sunset. No secretaries were present. No private aides stood nearby to soften the language or record what was said. Camilla waited beside the fireplace, still carrying the gloves she had worn in the collection room. The king placed William's amended access order on the desk and demanded an explanation. What followed was not a discussion about preservation. It was a struggle between a husband defending his wife and a son defending the dead. Charles had called the prince to the private library after Camilla told him she had been blocked in front of palace staff. The amended access order, a formal instruction controlling who could handle protected royal objects, had been signed without direct royal approval. To the monarch, that was not a small breach. It challenged his authority inside his own household. Charles pushed the paper across the desk. "You had no right to sign this alone." William did not touch it. "Then someone should have protected it before I had to." The answer changed the room. Camilla accused him of treating her like an intruder inside the family she now served as queen. William replied that the royal collection, the body responsible for preserving historic crown possessions, did not exist to prove anyone's place or heal anyone's reputation. His tone remained controlled, but the anger beneath it was unmistakable. Camilla stepped closer. She said the exhibition had been designed to show continuity, not competition. Then she revealed through a private planning memorandum that Charles had supported the two queens concept from the beginning, even if he had never approved direct handling of the gown. The king looked at his son, expecting that fact to end the dispute. William reached inside his folder instead. The prince placed a handwritten conservation note on the desk. Elizabeth II had signed it years earlier, after the gown's previous inspection. A conservation note is a written instruction explaining how a fragile historic object must be protected. Her message was simple. The garment should be moved only when historically necessary. Charles read the words once, then again. His voice weakened when William said his grandmother had been clear. The king loved the woman standing beside him, but he also carried the grief of a son who knew his mother could no longer defend her own wishes. Camilla watched that grief take hold and understood that loyalty alone might not be enough. William finally admitted what had driven him. The proposed display had made the late queen's gown feel like part of a carefully arranged image of equality. He could not accept that. Not now, not ever. Charles removed his spectacles and placed them beside the note. He ordered both of them to leave the gown untouched until every document had been reviewed. Camilla said nothing until she and William reached the corridor. Then she turned to him. Paperwork will not decide who belongs beside the crown. The argument had exposed the family's wounds. But the final decision would depend on a quieter machinery of authority, one that even the king could not control without consequence. Royal power often appears absolute from the outside. Inside the palace, it is divided among signatures, private instructions, curators, legal guardians, and people whose names are never spoken publicly. Charles could order the collection room opened. William could object. Camilla could plead her position. But the gown itself was protected by a web of personal directions left behind by Elizabeth II, and one elderly custodian remembered precisely why those restrictions had been written. Margaret Hale entered the review chamber carrying a small gray archive box. She had served as chief textile custodian for decades, meaning she was responsible for protecting fragile royal clothing and recording every inspection, repair, and movement. Her presence mattered, because the gown did not belong to one person's wishes alone. Its protection involved the sovereign, the Royal Collections Conservation Authority, and private instructions attached to the late Queen's personal effects. Charles watched Margaret place the box on the table. William remained still across from him, while Camilla sat nearby with her hands tightly folded. The prince did not own the gown, but his place on the collection committee the group allowed to review access to protected royal objects gave him enough authority to stop any handling until a formal decision was reached. Margaret opened the box slowly. Her hands trembled as she removed a folded note written after the garment's last inspection. She explained through the documented conservation record that Elizabeth II had once watched technicians lift the gown and had quietly asked that it not be repeatedly disturbed, merely to satisfy curiosity. Camilla's frustration broke through. She insisted that her request had been ceremonial, respectful, and connected to the exhibition. Margaret did not accuse her of bad intentions. She simply answered that respectful intentions did not make physical handling necessary. The words struck harder than anyone expected. Margaret then removed a second instruction. It stated that if disagreement arose, the gown must remain sealed until the reigning sovereign and the direct heir reached the same decision. The direct heir is the person first in line to inherit the throne, which meant Charles and William now held equal power over whether the garment could be moved. Charles understood the trap immediately. He could overrule his son only by ignoring a safeguard created during his mother's lifetime. William understood something else. His refusal now rested on more than personal grief. Camilla heard only exclusion. Charles asked Margaret what the late queen would have expected from them. The custodian paused before answering. She said Elizabeth II would have wanted the garment protected, but she would never have wanted it turned into a weapon against the family. The king postponed the exhibition and ordered a complete review. William had secured the delay. Camilla had lost access. By morning, the exhibition had been suspended, palace staff had been reassigned, and she faced the reality that the prince's single word had altered far more than access to one gown. The palace did not announce a family dispute. It announced a review of conservation arrangements. Yet behind the softened language, the consequences were immediate. The exhibition was frozen. The collection room was placed under new access controls. Staff who had witnessed William's refusal were instructed not to discuss it. And in the Queen's private office, Camilla received a revised program from which the coronation gown and her central role in presenting it had completely disappeared. Camilla read the final page once, then again. The revised program, the official schedule explaining which objects and speakers would appear, removed every mention of her planned presentation. An aide waited for instructions, but she gave none. She placed the papers into the fireplace and watched the decision turn to ash. The loss cut deeper than a cancelled event. Every object connected to Elizabeth II now required fresh approval, meaning the exhibition could not move forward until each item was cleared again. Senior staff called it procedure. Courtiers knew better. Camilla had built the project around continuity, and now the sudden delay made her look powerless inside the institution she was meant to help lead. Charles entered carefully. He told her the review protected everyone, including her, because no one could accuse the palace of mishandling the late queen's belongings. Camilla turned on him with quiet fury. She said he had allowed his son to humiliate her in front of staff, then hidden the wound beneath the language of conservation. The king tried to answer, but she did not let him. To Camilla, the gown had become proof that William could close the emotional doors of the monarchy whenever he chose. Rank had not protected her. Marriage had not protected her. Even Charles had not protected her. William felt the cost elsewhere. At Kensington Palace, he received a message canceling the private dinner he had scheduled with his father. The prince read it twice before placing his phone face down beside Catherine. She supported the decision to protect the gown, but she did not soften what came next. Catherine asked whether he had defended Elizabeth II or punished Camilla. The question struck him harder than Charles's anger. William admitted that part of him had wanted the queen consort to understand that becoming queen did not erase the pain attached to the family's past. He had wanted the boundary to hurt. Catherine held his gaze. She told him grief could explain the decision, but it could not excuse cruelty. Protecting the gown was one act. Humiliating Camilla was another. William finally understood the difference. That evening, the future king requested a private meeting with her. No Charles, no aides, no documents, no gown. For the first time, the two central figures would meet without royal machinery protecting either of them. And one honest admission would change the meaning of the entire conflict. William chose a small morning room far from the royal collection. There were no portraits of former monarchs on the walls, no ceremonial objects, and no staff waiting beyond the door. Camilla arrived expecting another warning. Instead, the prince apologized not for protecting the gown, but for the way he had made her feel while doing it. The boundary remained. Yet for the first time, both admitted that their argument had never truly been about touching fabric. Camilla stood beside the window and refused the chair offered to her. William remained near the door for a moment, then moved away from it. He had arranged the meeting without Charles, Catherine, advisors, or conservators, because he wanted no authority standing between them. The conservation restriction, the formal rule preventing the gown from being handled, would remain unchanged. He made that clear before anything personal was said. William admitted that stepping between her and the glass case had been deliberate. He had wanted the gesture to carry a message. The prince believed too many boundaries had been ignored inside the family, and part of him wanted Camilla to feel one that could not be crossed. The confession hurt, but it also opened the room. Camilla told him she had never wanted to wear the gown or claim it as her own. She wanted to touch the embroidery because Elizabeth II had once explained the meaning of its symbols during a private conversation, yet had never invited her close enough to study them. Camilla lowered her voice. The request, she said, had come from longing, not conquest. She had spent years wondering whether the late queen had ever truly accepted her, and the gown had become one final connection to an answer she could no longer receive. William saw the wound beneath the title. For a moment, she was not a rival standing near his grandmother's legacy. She was a woman still searching for proof that she had once belonged. Camilla then admitted that two queens, one crown had been a mistake. She had intended the title to show continuity between reigns. Now she understood why he had seen it as an attempt to manufacture equality between two women whose places in the monarchy had been earned in very different ways. William offered a compromise. The gown would remain sealed, but Margaret Hale would prepare a private digital examination, a detailed electronic record showing the embroidery without physical handling, along with Elizabeth II's preserved notes. Camilla reached into her handbag and removed the gloves. She placed them on the table. "I no longer need these," she said. William nodded. The physical request was over. Their agreement remained private, but the cancellation had already escaped palace walls. The two had finally understood one another. Yet outside the palace, a single photograph of Camilla's abandoned gloves would give the dispute a meaning neither had intended. By the next morning, the private dispute had become public through one unforgettable image. A long-lens photograph showed a palace attendant carrying Camilla's cream gloves away from the royal collection entrance, while William's car departed through the opposite gate. No gown could be seen. No argument had been recorded. Yet the picture appeared to tell the entire story. The Queen had reached for Elizabeth II's legacy, and the future king had stopped her. The leak moved quickly. Details of the cancelled exhibition and the revised access restrictions reached the press, while the private understanding between William and Camilla remained hidden. The access restrictions were the formal rules controlling who could handle protected royal objects, and without the reconciliation becoming public, every decision looked like open warfare. Supporters of the prince called his refusal an act of loyalty to Elizabeth II. Camilla's defenders saw something harsher. They argued that the reigning queen had been publicly shut out of a royal legacy she was expected to help preserve. Both sides claimed respect. Both turned pain into proof. One national newspaper placed the glove photograph across its front page beneath the headline, "Hands off the Queen's legacy." The image became the symbol of the entire dispute. It reduced grief, power, and private regret to a single brutal message. That evening, a broadcaster stood outside Windsor Castle and described the confrontation as a battle over whether royal memory belongs to the crown, the family, or the person who guards it most fiercely. Windsor Castle, one of the monarch's main royal residences, had now become the public stage for a conflict that had begun behind a closed door. A small crowd gathered near the King Henry VIII. Some held photographs of Elizabeth II. Others carried handwritten signs declaring, "Camilla is Queen too." The division was no longer hidden inside the palace. It had spread beyond the walls. William watched the coverage beside Catherine and felt his certainty begin to shift. He had wanted the gown protected. He had not wanted Camilla's humiliation celebrated as victory. The prince understood that the public story had become crueler than the private truth. Camilla studied the newspaper image in silence. She did not order a denial. She did not demand retaliation. Instead, the queen consort asked her secretary to confirm that no palace statement would attack William or challenge the restriction. She then approved a brief announcement stating that the gown would remain sealed under Elizabeth II's conservation wishes and that she fully respected the decision. William answered by authorizing confirmation that both royal households supported the revised preservation plan. The anger began to cool because neither side tried to win. Once the noise faded, only the final meaning remained. William had protected the gown, Camilla had surrendered her request, and the monarchy had been forced to define the boundary between remembrance and possession. The coronation gown was never removed from its case. Camilla never touched the silver embroidery, and William never withdrew the restriction that had caused the crisis. Yet the true verdict was not found in who won access. It was found in what each person surrendered. William gave up the satisfaction of punishment. Camilla gave up the need for physical proof of acceptance. Charles gave up the illusion that silence could keep peace inside a family still governed by memory. The exhibition changed completely. Camilla's robe was no longer placed beside Elizabeth II's gown, and the late Queen's garment remained sealed behind protective glass. Only approved archival material was used, meaning photographs, written records, and preserved documents could tell its story without exposing the fabric to physical handling. The decision protected more than the gown. It protected the boundary between honoring a monarch and reshaping her memory for a new reign. William accepted the hardest truth slowly. Safeguarding his grandmother's legacy had never required treating Camilla as an enemy. The prince kept the restriction in place, but he no longer defended the pain he had caused while enforcing it. His purpose had been right. His method had not. Protection without compassion, he now understood, could become another form of damage. Camilla reached her own conclusion. Becoming queen had given her rank, duty, and a place beside Charles. but it had not given her ownership of every private symbol connected to the woman before her. By withdrawing the request, she did not surrender her dignity. She proved it. The queen consort stepped back before the disagreement could become a permanent war between the throne and its future. Charles then approved a permanent rule. The sovereign, the reigning monarch, and the direct heir, the person next in line to the throne, would both need to agree before any of Elizabeth II's most personal ceremonial objects could be physically handled. The king had finally chosen clarity over silence. Weeks later, William and Camilla attended the redesigned exhibition privately. They stopped before the sealed gown, but neither moved toward the glass. "It is where it should be," she said. "Yes," he answered. Catherine later observed in a private family conversation that the conflict had produced something rare, a boundary that survived without becoming a permanent division. She understood that the gown now represented more than royal history. It showed the difference between inheriting the monarchy and possessing the woman who once embodied it. William had protected an irreplaceable object. Camilla had accepted a painful limit. Charles had finally acted before silence became surrender. The gown remained behind glass, untouched and unchanged, but those standing before it were no longer fighting over who owned the past. They had finally learned how to carry it together. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.